I'm Anna Wright, and I'm the founding director of Sleeping Bunnies. I'm just going to very quickly just cover kind of our own housekeeping at Sleeping Bunnies. So it's just really important that we share with you that all of the information and guidance that I'm going to be giving this evening is to give you a consensus of what could be changed to improve your sleep situation. But we do ask that you're mindful that without us doing a full one-to-one bespoke to your individual situation with a full sleep analysis, there may be some misalignments between the advice given and the impact of that. So it would be really irresponsible of us if we were to guarantee results when giving out specific advice or answering a question without doing that full sleep analysis. So just to clarify, I'm here to answer your questions in the Q&A at the end and give you lots of advice that will hopefully help, but we can't guarantee that everything's going to slot into place perfectly without doing that full sleep analysis. So just a little bit about myself. I'm Anna. I obviously am the founding director of Sleeping Bunnies. It is my fourth child, but I'm also a mum to 3 of my own beautiful children, who I absolutely adore. They are now 10, 9 in about 2 weeks, and 6. So I've been through each stage of parenting up to that point, and we do support children up to the age of 9 years old. So whether you've got a baby that's struggling with sleep, or a toddler, a preschool, or a school-age child, Sleeping Bunnies can work with you and your family. I'm also a qualified teacher. I left teaching almost a decade ago when I set up Sleeping Bunnies, and I worked very predominantly with children with SEN, and I had a specific interest in behaviour and sensory processing, which, as you'll see over the slides, as we start to chat a little bit more in depth about sleep, you'll start to see how it often interlinks. I've also worked in the NHS and obviously education settings, being a teacher. And I've now been supporting families with sleep for almost a decade. My journey with sleep was a very natural progression from working with families, as I mentioned, in behaviour and sensory processing and teaching. And when I first had my first daughter, I started to take a real interest in her sleep. And I just realised that actually my knowledge and understanding in behaviour and sensory processing and meeting need really did kind of echo itself in sleep and being a parent, and creating healthy sleep habits and good routines and so forth. So since then, I've done a lot of work and extra training in sleep consultancy, and I now run Sleeping Bunnies, and I have a team of incredible sleep consultants that work for me under the Sleeping Bunnies umbrella with the same shared values and ethos, and we support families all over the world, so not just in the UK. So I'm going to start this evening by talking to you about overtiredness. Now, overtiredness is, I would say, 9 times out of 10 the biggest issue when families come to work with us. Usually, like I say, 90% of the time it is down to a level of overtiredness, and it is one of the biggest barriers to sleep. So if you've got a child that has gone past their sleepy window, they're not getting enough sleep, that overtiredness has a really negative impact on not only their ability to get to sleep, but also their ability to stay asleep. So the difficulty with little ones is we can become overtired as adults, but we kind of are clued up enough to know, okay, I'm really overtired. What can I do for myself to regulate my body, reset my nervous system, and get myself to sleep? Obviously, for babies and children, they are not as accomplished at that skill, and they need our support at co-regulation, and they need us to help them to feel safe, secure, and their nervous system settled so that they are able to get to sleep. So because they need that level of support from us, and they need us to be sort of managing all of that all of the time, they learn skills to cope with resisting it. And that spike in cortisol, so the stress hormone is cortisol, and when we're overtired, that cortisol level rises. And when it's too high, it makes it increasingly difficult for them to get to sleep. And often presentation of that overtiredness may look like, and I've got some signs here, eye rubbing, yawning, having red eyebrows, a blank or glazed vacant stare. Sometimes they might be back arching, In older children, you might notice that they're hyperactive. It might be that they, the phrase bouncing off the walls right before bedtime. Sometimes they might be hair pulling, crying, fussiness, difficulties with feeding and meal times. Often when children are overtired, they find it really hard to attend to a simple activity of sitting down and having a snack or some food. You might see tantrums, emotional outbursts, but also clumsiness, poor concentration, and much, much more. So there are so many signs that children can communicate with us that they are overtired, that they need to get to sleep. And we want to be looking at these signs and starting to really pay attention to when we're seeing them, because when you are vigilant and you're looking at noticing their behaviours and how they're presenting themselves, it makes it far easier to identify when maybe they should have gone to sleep. Because in an ideal world, we don't want to see too many of these signs, because often when we're seeing a lot of this, it means that we've left either nap time or bedtime way too late. Sleep quota is also a topic that is really important, and we want to be making sure that children are getting the most sleep that they need. We don't ever want to be giving them less. So when their sleep quota is low and they're not getting the total sleep in 24 hours, what happens is that cortisol level spikes, and you're just going to start to see more and more of these tired signs. And like I say, when you're seeing those tired signs, often we've missed that sleepy window, and then getting to sleep can prove extremely difficult. In smaller children, you might see more of the crying, the fussiness, difficulties with feeding. Older children, it's often more hyperactivity, tantrums, emotional outbursts. But what I would say with all of these signs of overtiredness is that when cortisol is high, the only way the human body can excrete that cortisol is through being awake for longer, so through wakefulness, and also through movement. So in older children, that's when they become quite fidgety, hyperactive. That in that movement and that wakefulness, that is how they are bringing that cortisol level down and excreting it, so that they are then in a better place to be able to get to sleep and stay asleep. Now, my next point is sleep latency. Sleep latency is the term that we use to describe the time it takes them to go to sleep. So that's the bit before their sleep cycle. So we have sleep cycles, which is how we travel through our sleep stages, and we have 4 stages to those sleep cycles. Now, the sleep latency sits just before that, and we want sleep latency to be a kind of medium length of time. So if you've got a little one that's falling asleep within a couple of minutes or taking an hour to get to sleep, both of those sleep latencies are telling you that their sleepy window, or the time you're trying to get them to sleep, isn't quite right for them. We want sleep latency to sit around 15 to 20 minutes. So that is actually quite a long time for a little one to be slowly getting ready to fall to sleep. So quite often with this sleep latency, what tends to happen is parents think, oh, it's been 15 minutes, they're never going to go to sleep. So then they kind of either give up, or you end up in a bit of a bedtime battle or a nap battle, when actually it's probably just that we've got that sleepy window not quite spot on. Other signs that your little one might be overtired is you might be experiencing multiple night wakings. Now, obviously, I'm not too sure the ages of your little ones here this evening, but if you would like to put in the comments box, as Louise mentioned at the start, the age and the issues that you're experiencing currently, that will really help when we get to the Q&A, because night wakings are also age appropriate for small babies, because they need to wake to feed. But if you've got toddlers and preschoolers and children still waking nightly and waking overnight multiple times, it may be a sign of overtiredness and that their sleep is fragmented, and you're not getting those lovely long sleep cycles with a nice sleep latency where they can just keep linking the next one and the next one. Another really, I would say, for us as sleep consultants, obvious sign of overtiredness is when they're starting their day at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. That is often a sign that they are not getting the sleep they need. Cortisol starts to creep in, and around the early hours, we need cortisol to be awake for the day. That's what we kind of burn off throughout the day, is that cortisol. So it does rise around 4 or 5 a.m. And if you've already got heightened levels of cortisol, that cortisol is going to really prevent your little one from being able to go back to sleep that time of the morning. And as I mentioned about sleep quota, we want that sleep over a 24-hour period to be suitable for your individual child. So when we do one-to-one sleep consultations, we look at the sleep they're getting at the beginning of our package, and then we obviously work on sleep throughout. And by the time we finished our 4-week package, the sleep quota over 24 hours is always so much higher. And that's when you're getting, if your little one is still napping, good naps and long stretches overnight and sleeping through. So we're always looking at that sleep over a 24-hour period. Dependent on culture and work-life balance, sometimes you might have a child that only does 9 or 10 hours overnight, but maybe has naps for a lot longer in the day, or a baby that has really long naps in the day but slightly shorter overnight. Or you might have a situation where your little ones are doing shorter naps in the day but they're getting lots of sleep overnight. And we always look at the total sleep in 24 hours. That's our kind of way that we make sure that they're not overtired. So next up, healthy sleep hygiene. Now, sleep hygiene is the term that we use to describe bedtime routine. It is the sequence that sits before they fall to sleep. So it's before that sleep latency. So they're not going off to sleep. This is the routine that you work through with your baby, toddler, preschooler or child. The bedtime routine does impact the whole night. So if you're having a very long-winded bedtime sleep hygiene that is going on and potentially quite stimulating, it can actually impact their nighttime sleep. So it's really important that we look at the sleep hygiene and make sure that we are giving them the right setup for that night ahead. So we always advise only 3 parts to that bedtime sequence. You want to keep it really concise, really straightforward, predictable, so that night in, night out, whether it's a grandparent, a carer, a mum or a dad, whoever it is that's settling your little one to sleep, it is always the same. You know, there's no deviation. It's not like, oh, with this person I do X, Y, Z, and then with this person I do A, B, C. We want it to always be the same and kind of mirror night to night. So as I've said, an example would be to that 3 parts of your bedtime sequence. It could be milk, bath, and then story. And like I say, you just want it to be the same every single night so that it's predictable. It needs to be at the suitable time for your little one. Now, we get so many families that come to us and say, you know, bedtime's always at 7. We never move around bedtime. And although that's helpful for their circadian rhythm, which is their internal body clock to predict 7 o'clock's bedtime, with little ones, we sometimes need to be a bit more flexible with bedtime. So, for example, if you've got a child that naps in the day and they've skipped that nap completely, it would be a disadvantage to hold out till 7 o'clock for bedtime if they're already overtired, because then you're going to get to bedtime and you're going to be resisting their cortisol levels, that, as I've just mentioned. So it's really important to be flexible when needed to make sure that we are getting that accurate sleep window for when they actually need to be falling to sleep. I often talk about kind of summertime versus the lovely dark nights that we've got now. You know, if it's starting to get dark at 4 or 5 p.m, it might be, and your little one's been up since 5 a.m. in the morning, it might be that your child is starting to produce melatonin, which is the sleep hormone, as early as 5 p.m. If it's dark outside, they've been awake 12 hours. So then if we try and keep them up till their regular bedtime of 7, we're going past that sleepy window, cortisol's spiking, and then we're going to be again in that battle of either letting them wait and work it off and excrete that cortisol, or they potentially might have a very short sleep latency and fall asleep within minutes. And both of those aren't helpful for nighttime sleep and consistently long stretches of sleep. We don't want their bedtime routine to be too long. So we want it to be nice and fast paced. So we tend to say no more than half an hour for any child, even us as adults. You know, if we went upstairs and spent a whole hour and 20 minutes in our room trying to settle ourselves, we would end up getting irritable, a bit ratty, and think, oh, I'm just going to go back downstairs now. That's not going to work for me tonight. So the same with your little ones. You know, it needs to be quite predictable, fast-paced, and 30 minutes max. And if you've got little ones under 6 months, I would say 20 minutes max. So 30 sort of for your older babies, toddlers and children, but even little ones, you know, we're still saying no more than 20 minutes. We often suggest quick transitions, and we use a few strategies, and I'll just mention a couple. So, for example, a lot of parents struggle getting their children out of the bath, into pyjamas, and we do have lots and lots of strategies that we use at Sleeping Bunnies. One of which is flying in an aeroplane, and lots of toddlers and preschoolers love this. So wrap them in a towel and kind of whiz them around into the bedroom as quick as you can, and make it exciting and make that transition almost seamless, rather than getting into a, right, it's time to get out of the bath now, and they think, oh no, I'm enjoying myself having a bit of water play. But actually doing a really quick transition like that is often a really good way to get them onto the next stage without any resistance. We also recommend using sound timers, just showing a sound timer and saying in 2 minutes we're getting out of the bath, just giving them that little bit of a visual cue that the bath time's coming to an end and we're moving on to the next part of the routine. Another very common issue around healthy sleep hygienes is where parents get into the rhythm of reading multiple books, and this often happens with more kind of toddlers and preschoolers, which is lovely. They are enjoying their stories, and that is incredible. We want to encourage their love for books, but right before bedtime, if it starts to extend that sleep hygiene and it starts to take a very long time, often they get stimulated, their brain's getting filled with all these lovely ideas and thoughts, and then we're actually doing the opposite to the brain. We're not winding them down, we're actually starting to stimulate them, which is not helpful for them drifting off to sleep. So we always suggest 1 or 2 books, sometimes giving 2 choices, so getting out a couple of books that you know your child likes at bedtime, saying which one would you like, and letting them choose, or say I'm going to choose a book and you can choose a book, but holding that boundary so that it doesn't end up in a hour-long book marathon. What we do say is you can absolutely do more evening reading, but do it before the bedtime routine, so before your sleep hygiene. So have some books downstairs before you even take them upstairs and start that sleep hygiene. Have it, you know, in the lounge or in the kitchen, so it's not associated with that sleep hygiene. Because the moment you go upstairs and you start that sleep hygiene, their body will start to predict those 3 parts to the sequence, and it will be starting, their brain will be starting to start to shut down and relax, ready for sleep. Early wakings. As I mentioned when I was talking about overtiredness, early wakings are often one of the biggest signs that we see for overtiredness. So when we're looking at sleep diaries from our families, we can start to see, okay, they are waking at 5 o'clock religiously, their sleep quota's low, their sleep latency is quick, and we can start to say, okay, we can see the reoccurring pattern here that this child's overtired. So I'm just going to chat to you some of the main causes of the early wakings, one of which is overtiredness. Also, their primal needs. So if you've got a child or a toddler that is potentially potty trained in the day, come 5 a.m, they may well be needing to go to the toilet in the morning because because cortisol's rising at that time of day, ready for us to be awake for the day. They're much more aware than what they are maybe 10 p.m. the night before of having a wet nappy or needing to go to the loo. So we often say, if you're getting little ones waking at 4 or 5, have a look at their primal needs. Is there anything that they're hearing? Is there heating coming on? Is there an alarm going off for somebody in the house? Is the heating not yet on, and that's when the house is at its coldest? So are their feet cold? Are they waking up because they've kicked the duvet off? So just making sure when we think of primal needs, we're thinking of temperature, sound, bladder, all of those other things that we just want to make sure that they're not waking for. So by looking at those primal needs, that's kind of how you're going to prevent the early wakes, along with making sure they're not overtired, keeping on top of that sleep quota, and also looking at their sleep latency, again, the time it takes them to get to sleep at bedtime or for naps. What do we consider as early? So this is a very, I think we have this idea of what little people should be sleeping, and it's very much governed by the Industrial Revolution, which, set up kind of this idea of 7 till 7, we work 9 till 5. Unfortunately, for infants, they don't think like that. They're not looking at societal norms thinking, right, the day starts at 7 o'clock. they are very much more in tune to their needs, their internal body clock, their circadian rhythm, and those hormones. So we at Sleeping Bunnies, and lots of different sleep professionals will have different approaches, but we are very much led by them, their individual situation, and what we're focusing on. So it's a very difficult one to say what's considered early. Generally speaking, I would say anything before 6 we would be working on to get it later. However, if we had a little one that was sleeping 6 till 6, or 6:30 till 6, I wouldn't consider that as early. I would say that is absolutely suitable. If we had a little one going to bed at 7 but up at 5, that is definitely considered early, because you're only getting 10 hours. And it is very much dependent on the individual situation. But hopefully that gives you all a little bit of an idea. It is about basically that wake up time is impacting not only the child but also the family setup. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about 7 senses and sleep associations. So when families come to work with us, often they want support with self-settling. And as much as I'd love to sit on here this evening and tell you all how to get your child to self-settle in their sleep space, in their cot, there is so much at play in order to get to that place. So I'm going to start by talking to you about the 5 main senses. So probably the majority of you, maybe not, but I would think there's many of you listening this evening that know about the sight, sound, taste, smell and touch. And they are our body's natural senses that we rely on for safety, for comfort, for regulation, and ultimately for sleep. Because as a survival technique, we're never going to go to sleep if we don't feel safe and secure and regulated. And it is those senses that help us feel that way. We also have proprioception and vestibular. Now, proprioception is also often called like the 6th sense, and sometimes vestibular is quoted as the 7th. Proprioception is that when babies are in the womb, it's that pressure around their body. So, this photo of this mum holding her baby, that is tapping in and giving your baby or your child a sense of self in space. And it really does depend on all those sensory receptors. Vestibular is another system which they work very, very closely together, and they are interlinked. But this is a lot more to do with movement. So that's why lots of babies and toddlers and children love spinning, swinging, rocking. Even older children, love going to the park and going on a roundabout or swinging on a swing. And that vestibular and proprioception is regulation for children and toddlers and babies. So although it's important that we look at sight, sound, taste, smell and touch, it's also really good to look at the other 2, because actually when it comes to sleep, sometimes touch isn't enough and they need a little bit more. I know when we first joined this evening, one parent put in the group that we've got an 18-month-old that's rocked to sleep. Really, really typical that as they get a little bit older, they need that bit more input, or sometimes they've always needed that input. So it's just really good to look at all these senses and what's required for a baby, toddler or child to feel safe and for their nervous system to feel secure and regulated, so that they can then get to sleep. And what we do when we do our one-to-one sleep packages is we look at these senses, and you can absolutely do this yourselves. You can look at your baby or your toddler or your child's sense or what it is that they're relying on. So maybe you're feeding to sleep, maybe you're rocking to sleep, you might be bouncing, they might need motion, they might need the car. So look at what it is that they're needing to get to sleep. And then what you can do is you can habit stack, you can layer up some new associations to give them a bit of security and regulation. So it might be that they can see something or touch something, or it might be that they can smell something, so that we can start to move away from that sort of more the sort of more intense input of movement and physical security. Now, obviously, it's each to their own, and some families will make progress with sleep and they will still be cuddling their child all night long, and that is absolutely fine as well. It's about what you want to do, what your aims and outcomes are, but I'm just sharing some little nuggets of advice along the way. So I think I've said that our bodies our body senses very closely impact the way in which we fall to sleep. Our senses are there to keep us safe, and safety is imperative to allow each of us to fall to sleep. And this is where the associations come in. I often use the example of, if you were to fall asleep in one setup, so your parents, they're laying with you at the beginning of the night, you're co-sleeping, you feel really safe, you can smell them, you can feel them, and then your parent gets up, goes downstairs, has some dinner, you wake up and they're not there. Their nervous system is going to go into fight or flight, and they're probably going to wake up in a panic and be really distressed. And that's because they are trying to recreate the setup that they had before. So when we work on sleep associations and we work on self-settling, we try and, like I say, habit stack and build some new habits that can give them that added security, even when we start to peel back, whether it's the parent or a dummy or whatever it is, whatever we're working on, we've added in extras before we take away the one thing that's maybe a little bit harder to keep up with. So oxytocin-inducing activities, often known as the love hormone, bonding hormone and cuddle chemicals. So lots of children rely on that contact and that touch because it gives them that oxytocin. And oxytocin, in turn, is going to help them sleep well. So it's really important that we don't take that away. We want to make sure that we're giving them lots of opportunities for physical closeness, hugs, tickles, touch. In smaller babies, breastfeeding, socializing, acts of kindness, eye contact, laughing and responding to your child's needs. There are so many ways that we can release that oxytocin, and we can do it throughout the day. We don't just have to do it that 5 or 10 minutes or an hour before bed. You know, oxytocin, if we want to raise those levels of oxytocin in our children and our babies' bodies, we can do that in little moments throughout the day. So the more you do of that, the better, and the easier it will be when you get to bedtime. If you see it as balancing scales, we want to make sure oxytocin and serotonin's up here and cortisol is sort of a little bit lower for sleep. So it's always about trying to reduce that cortisol and increase those love hormones. Another two huge factors when it comes to sleep and good quality sleep is exercise. So the World Health Organization does recommend some kind of guidelines for little ones. So under ones to be active multiple times a day, which I think any parent joining us this evening can probably agree that that's not a hard task to achieve. They're on the go, aren't they, all the time? 1 to 2 year olds spending 3 hours spread across the day, being physical in activities at any intensity. So just being on the go and active, and lots of little ones at this age are now at nursery. So again, that's not too hard to achieve. 3 and 4 year olds need 3 hours, but at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise. And I think this is where it gets a little bit trickier. As children get older, we have to be a little bit more mindful as to how much screen time are they having, how much sedentary play are they having, especially with all of the apps and stuff on the screens and iPads and everything. So it's about making sure that you look across your week and make sure you're getting that level of exercise that is recommended for your child's age. The other thing I often say is a little blowout before bedtime can often help, even in the weather's not great, but I always say there's no such thing as inappropriate weather, it's just inappropriate clothing. And I always recommend just getting outside as often as you can throughout your day. And, even if it is getting in from nursery or school and just giving them a little bit of fresh air, stopping at the park on the way home, just giving them lots of opportunities to burn that cortisol off so that they can get to sleep a little bit easier. Moving on to screen time. So again, the recommendation is no screens for under ones, which I think with FaceTime and lots of other apps that we have and we do use, that's hard to achieve, but just being mindful that is the recommendation. 1 to 2 year olds, no sedentary screen time. So we don't really want to encourage sitting down for periods. If it is used at 2, just up to an hour, and then 3 and 4 year olds up to 1 hour as well. And then 5+, there's no specific time suggestions that limit recreational screen time. So again, just making sure they're meeting those needs for movement and active play and good quality sleep. But all of this together will just help your child be in a better place to fall to sleep and sleep well. So just making sure they're active, Screen time releases a lot of dopamine, and quite often we can get fixed on that, which is why it is suggested that we limit how much we let our children access screens. So it's all about hormonal balance, and by looking at all of these different areas, hopefully it will give you a little bit more insight as to how to get a little bit of a better balance for your child. Okay, we're on to the Q&A. I'm very, very aware that that was very generic. Obviously, when we're doing presentations like this, we could have 6-month-old babies and 6-year-old children. So I try and cover topics that are going to be useful for everybody. We're going to get onto the Q&A now. Before we start and before I come out of the slideshow and read your questions, just really important to say that there is no question too silly. Really likely that a question you're answering, a question you are asking, there will be other parents thinking, oh, I was going to ask that. You know, I've been doing this job for almost a decade and the questions are often very similar and we've heard them before. So don't panic, ask away, feel comfortable. You're all on individual parenting journeys and will have different experiences. So as much as one parent might say that their child's doing this, you might have a child the exact same age and think, oh, my child's nowhere near doing that. Or it might be the opposite, but just try not to compare yourselves. Everyone is on a different journey and someone might be experiencing one issue and somebody else might have a very different one that's equally as difficult. And just know that there is always room to learn, and most importantly, always room for improvement. You know, as I said, I've got older children now and I'm still learning, you know, the next stage of parenting with older children and emotions and relationships and homework, and there's always room for improvement. And I think it's just great that there's platforms like this where we can all come together and support each other.